We've been in a series together where we've been focused on the story of God. We've been taking a look at God's movement throughout history to draw us to Himself. We started in the Garden of Eden a couple of weeks ago, and we looked at Adam and Eve as they lived in paradise with their God, in deep relationship and connection with God, as He originally intended it to be. Yet we know that that picture became marred and distorted as sin entered into the world through Adam and Eve's rebellion, their disobedience, and their lack of trust in their God. As a result, all of creation was left marred and distorted, and our relationship with God as well was broken. Adam and Eve's rebellion passed down to you and to me. And added to that is our own rebellion, which has left us desperately separated from God, living in a world of brokenness, despair, and crisis. Yet we saw that God was moving. He was pursuing, He was persisting, He was working His plan to redeem and restore human beings back to Himself. We saw just moments after the incident in the garden in which the fall occurred. And then we saw it again last week as we saw God give a promise to Abraham and called Abraham to partner with Him in seeing the nations move from curse and brokenness and despair and death and sin and crisis to instead move toward blessing and redemption, restoration and healing and salvation. Over the last couple of weeks, we've also been watching my coffee mug, my item of beauty that was handcrafted and hand-painted and made with incredible purpose. We watched it fall to the ground and be broken. And then we watched last week as I tried to piece it back together, but saw that I could not restore it back to its beauty nor to its purpose. And it's a reminder of how we often act, trying to put our own lives back together, making them more whole, making them more purposeful, making them better. Yet we always fall short, and we end up hiding ourselves from God, pretending that everything has been restored and everything is okay on the outside, while inside, brokenness and sin and rebellion is still active. Yet there is hope. We read of it last week as we caught a vision of restoration and redemption through a promise that was made to Abraham. While it still was a dimly lit promise out in the distance, there was a promise that Abraham had been blessed by God in order to be a blessing so that the nations, all nations, would be blessed. And we talked about how it's a thread that runs throughout Scripture. Then, as we look forward to a redemption and a restoration of all that went wrong in the garden as God makes it right. This morning we're going to see that picture come into a little bit clearer focus. While still off in the distance and not yet clear during the time that this prophecy was given, it still clarifies the picture for us. We're going to look at a prophecy written by Isaiah, as he wrote about the Messiah, the one who is to come to make all things right, the one whom we know to be Jesus the Christ. Before we read this together, just a little bit about this passage we're about to read and about Isaiah. Isaiah is writing 700 years before the coming of Jesus. He is writing to a people who will someday be taken into captivity by Babylon. And he is writing to them words of hope that God had promised to release them. Isaiah comes as a voice into a time of darkness, as a captivity would continue to drag on. And he says to them, as God has promised, your captivity is coming to an end. He tells them that they're about to go back to the land that God had given to Abraham. They were about to be set free. Yet Isaiah's message is about more than simply a people at a certain time of history being under Babylon's captivity who are about to be released. No, there's a timeless truth that Isaiah gives us here. He points the way to a freedom that is coming once and for all from and under the ultimate oppressor, from and under Satan. He looks forward to true peace and true freedom, to true restoration, true healing, true life, true joy coming, the day when all things will be set right. Isaiah speaks of the coming of the Messiah, the coming of Jesus, the one who would make all things right forever, the one who would restore all back to the place that God had originally intended it to be, the one who would make humans right with God once again, the one who would free us from true slavery to bring us to true freedom, the one who would pay the price of redemption that we could not pay. The one who would sacrifice for our guilt and shame so that we no longer would need to hide. The Restorer is coming. A vision of Isaiah that was not quite in focus, that would take 700 years to come into focus. Yet we can know him today. Let's stand together and we're going to read from Isaiah chapter 52 and 53 as it comes up on the screen here. Let's read together. But you will not leave in haste or go in flight, for the Lord will go before you. The God of Israel will be your rear guard. See, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any man, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So will he sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they were not told, they will see, and what they have not heard, they will understand. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows. Yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, and who can speak of his descendants? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was stricken. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life a guilt offering, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After the suffering of his soul, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life on the dead, and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. The word of the Lord. Please be seated. And let's pray. Jesus, we thank you for these words given to us by the prophet Isaiah, 700 years before your coming. And I pray that this morning you would bring them alive to us, that you would help us to hold on to the promise and the reality of what it means that you came to fulfill these words. We pray this in your name. Amen. Isaiah's message to us here is that God will break into the darkness with full redemption. God will break into the darkness with full redemption. Verse 12 of chapter 52, we read, "But you will not leave in haste or go in flight, for the Lord will go before you. The God of Israel will be your rear guard." It seems here that Isaiah is speaking to those in Judah and saying, look, your deliverance is going to look different than what it looked like when the Israelites left the land of Pharaoh, when they left Egypt, when the Exodus occurred. If you remember, Moses had asked Pharaoh if they could have a few days to go out and perform religious duties. And Pharaoh kept saying no and no and no, and finally a series of plagues come, and we see Pharaoh say yes. But he says to the Israelites, during the night, he says, now you can leave. And they leave Egypt under the cover of darkness, and they leave in a great hurry as they go. And then we read, though, how Pharaoh's army is in this dramatic pursuit against them, and the Red Sea opens up, and the Israelites cross while Pharaoh's army is consumed by the Red Sea. Isaiah, it appears in this passage, is saying it's going to be different this time. This time, redemption is going to be fully paid for. They would not need to leave in a hurry. They would not need to leave at night. They would not need to run. This time, God would be their rear guard, and He would move in front of them. He would go before them, and He also would be watching their back. He would pay a way for their full redemption. John Calvin says, the way this time is different is that Isaiah is speaking here that they will leave as conquerors this time around. And it's a word to us as well of the full redemption. This is good news that sets up the rest of this passage for us. That God's plan includes a full redemption. He breaks into the darkness with His full redemption. The price that has been paid for you and I in full. There is nothing due. A full freedom, a full restoration, a full salvation. His light of freedom shining into our dark, marred, broken, distorted world. And our dark, broken, marred, distorted selves. It's a great promise for us to hold on to. But it's also a great reality for us to know that God has broken into the darkness to redeem us and restore us. His century-old plan is in full operation. This morning we're going to look at the promise and also the reality as Isaiah lays it out here for us. May it help us to see God's plan that He has worked out on your behalf and my behalf and on behalf of the world around us. As God has been on a mission to reconcile us to Himself, to reconcile us to ourselves, to reconcile us to each other, and to reconcile us to our creation. May it come into clearer focus for us today. We're going to start by looking at verse 13 here and talking about holding on to the promise and the reality that Isaiah gives us here. The first is found in verse 13. We read, "See, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted." God used His obedient servant is the first thing we see here. Remember, we've talked about obedience the last couple of weeks. We started the first week by talking about Adam and Eve's disobedience. How in the garden they chose to disobey God, and in their own rebellion, disobedience came into the picture. Last week we talked about Abraham, and we read this verse from chapter 12 of Genesis. So Abraham left as the Lord had told him. Abram steps out into an unknown land as God had spoken to him, obeying and putting one step in front of the other. Yet, Abraham did not have a full obedience, as we talked about. But now we read in verse 13 about the obedient servant. Isaiah is pointing the way to Jesus, who would be the servant of God, acting wisely. What God had been seeking from humans all along, to obey Him and come in relationship, now we see Jesus fulfill for us. Despite our disobedience, God uses the obedient servant to fulfill his purpose. God made the way. In Philippians 2:8, we read this. He humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. That Jesus humbled himself as a servant and became obedient even to death on the cross. What we could not do in fully obeying God, God sent Jesus to do. Jesus being the obedient servant, so that disobedient rebels like you and me could be restored. What an amazing rescue plan God has put in place. God is restoring what went wrong in the garden. Now let's look at verses 14 to 15. We read this, just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any man, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So will he sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they were not told, they will see, and what they have not heard, they will understand. Isaiah points to this idea of how Jesus, the Messiah, unexpectedly draws the nations. The Messiah would not be who people expected him to be. He would not be who the nations expected him to be. Yet God would keep his promise, that promise that was given in Genesis 12 to Abraham, that all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. God is keeping that promise, but in an unexpected and surprising way. We first read about how the nations were appalled. They were shocked to look at the Messiah's condition, the one who would be disfigured beyond human likeness. This would become shocking to the nations and would surprise them. We read Isaiah's words, so he would sprinkle many nations. This word sprinkling here is a word that is used in Leviticus to talk about the sprinkling of the blood of the sacrifice in order to cover the sins of the people. It would lead to the marveling and the surprise of even kings because of what he would do, the unexpected that he does to draw the nations to himself. He would not come as a great military leader to bring freedom and redemption. He would not come as a power broker to release his people through violent revolution. Rather, he would come and he would take the mistreatment and the violence on himself in order to win the nations to himself. Nations would be redeemed not through military conquest, but rather through his sacrifice on their behalf, the sprinkling of his blood, so that the nations could come to know the living God. What a great promise that God has kept that we can hold on to. Now we move on to chapter 53 and look at verses 1 through 2. We read, who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. Verse 1 here leads us to remember the arm of the Lord, the strong arm of the Lord. It's an image of God's strength that he shows, the arm of judgment, the arm of deliverance, the strong God. But then we get halfway through verse 1 and into verse 2, and it seems to counter this first statement, as these verses talk of weakness, not of strength. We read that the one who is to come would grow like a tender shoot. We would expect Isaiah to say he'll grow like a mighty tree. But he says he will grow like a tender, fragile shoot. An image of Jesus as the new growth from the stump of Jesse, the family line of David, to whom God had promised that one day there would be a king who would sit on his throne forever and ever, but whom it appeared God had forgotten. That all that was left was a stump of that promise, a dead, lifeless stump. Yet Isaiah says, there's a shoot of new growth that is coming out of that stump, a tender shoot. We also read this imagery from Isaiah of a root out of dry ground. an image of a root growing out of the desert, a place of hopelessness and barrenness, where nothing could grow. Yet Isaiah says, growth is occurring. It is coming. What is God doing? He is raising up not someone from a royal line living in a palace, but rather his strong plan is in a despised, suffering servant. One who has no beauty, no majesty, nothing desirable about him, is what Isaiah tells us. Then verse 3. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. He was despised, rejected, the sufferer, experiencing sorrow and pain. Men would hide their faces from him as one who was despised. In Jesus, we see God's plan come into fulfillment. The words that Isaiah had spoken. The one who was despised by the religious people who were looking for the Messiah to come. The one who was rejected by friend and foe alike. The one who would experience excruciating pain for you and for me. The one who would suffer, taking our sufferings on himself. The one from whom men would hide their faces then and also today. God's strong plan was in a despised, suffering servant. This is God's plan of true redemption, rescue, and restoration, winning us back to himself as only the strong God can do. The strong plan of the strong God done in a way that seems foolishness to human beings. We move on to verse 4 and 5. Holding on to the promise and the reality, we read, surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows, yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. Isaiah unveils even more of the fullness of God's plan of rescue and redemption for us here. He would make payments for our rebellion. Redemption would be ours. Once and for all, we could find redemption. The rebellion that started in the garden and that continued to be carried on came with a price. We saw that price being paid in the garden, and we see that price all around us in the brokenness and crisis of our world. Yet God chose to put a plan in motion to pay for it. This one who was to come would take on our infirmities, our sin sickness, our sin disease, and our sorrows, our pain. He carried them to the point that he looked like he was the cursed one. He was seen as stricken by God, smitten by him, afflicted by God. Jesus would be seen as the sinner and as the criminal who was paying a price for his sin, when in reality, he was paying for ours. Still today, people have trouble looking to Jesus. Yet Isaiah lets us know that this baby born in the manger was making payment for us. He was pierced for our transgressions, for our rebellion. He was crushed for our iniquities, for our guilt, a word which literally means crookedness. All that was broken, all that was distorted in that rebellion, all that is distorted in our lives could now be made straight. He was being crushed so that straightness could come. He was punished to bring us peace. And by his wounds we are healed. The wounding, the striping of his back would bring us wholeness. Isaiah looks into the future and he sees the one who is to come to bring the full redemption for our sin, for our brokenness, and our captivity. But just in case we don't see our own issues, our own depravity, our own sin problem, Isaiah includes verse 6 in here for us to point out our own need. We read, we all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way. He uses sheep as an illustration. First, he says, we all, like sheep, have gone astray. We know that sheep are not the smartest animals on the planet. They follow whatever is in front of them. And here it appears as if Isaiah is pointing to the fact that that rebellion that started in the garden, it distorts our human condition and includes all of us. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Our broken human condition. But then Isaiah continues and he says, each of us has turned to his own way. Isaiah seems to point out that we also have our own rebellious choices that we make too. Each of us has turned our own way. We choose our own rebellion. We choose to go our own way rather than going God's way, day by day, minute by minute. I am rebellious, yet payment was made for my rebellion. His redemption has been made. 1 Peter 2:25 points to this redemption, where we read, He himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, for you were like sheep going astray, but now you have returned to the shepherd and overseer of your soul. He bore our sins on the tree. We were like sheep going astray, but now we can be returned to the shepherd, our overseer. We have been restored to him and made right. Deep relationship with our shepherd is again possible because our rebellion has been dealt with. We can be in his pen again. The baby whose coming we're celebrating at this time of the year fulfilled a centuries-old promise given to Isaiah 700 years prior, and it's coming into greater and clearer focus. Then we come to verse 6 through 8. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And who can speak of his descendants? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was stricken. Isaiah tells us he took on the iniquity, the guilt, the depravity of us all. We read that the Lord laid it on him. The heavy weight of guilt that was mine to carry, God took it and he placed it on the back of Jesus. Imagine. The suffering servant took on my guilt. It was laid on him. He bore the weight of my guilt and my shame. God's rescue plan to redeem me and you through a suffering servant who would suffer on our behalf. Then Isaiah draws our attention to Jesus' obedience here, to the Messiah's obedience. We read that he was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. He never opened his mouth in complaint. He had every right to open his mouth in complaint. He was being driven like an innocent lamb to the slaughter. This was unjust. This was wrong. He was oppressed. He was being wrongly judged. He was being cut off from the living. Yet all he had in mind was obedience to his Father and his Father's mission. He was being stricken not for his rebellion, but for my rebellion, for the transgression, the rebellion of Isaiah's people, which includes you and me. He was being oppressed, he was being afflicted, he was being stricken for that reason. Then we continue into verse 9 and 10. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life a guilt offering, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. The suffering servant taking on our guilt, being treated as a criminal, being given a grave with the sinner and with the wicked for our guilt, not his own. He had done no violence, Isaiah tells us, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. Innocent, made to pay for my guilt. Interestingly, some point to this phrase in here, about him being with the rich in his death, that it was fulfilled when Joseph of Arimathea gave up his tomb in order for Jesus' body to be laid in it. A rich man giving up his tomb, because otherwise Jesus would have been buried as a criminal, as a sinner, as a nameless criminal. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him, we read, and cause him to suffer, to become a guilt offering. God's will, God's mission, God's sovereign plan, initiated in the garden, which he preserved through the centuries. That promise that through the one to come, Satan's head would be crushed while he bit at the heel. Him causing suffering, but yet through the Messiah, through the one who was to come, we see redemption made known. God makes it happen through the suffering servant taking on our guilt. The one whom Isaiah saw off in the distance as a promise we can know as a reality. The baby born in a manger in Bethlehem, come to rule and come to save. One more idea from this passage, a promise and a reality to hold on to. We look at verses 11 through 12. After the suffering of his soul, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. Isaiah's picture does not end with just a suffering servant. Rather, he sees a ruling, victorious king. After the suffering, we read, he will see the light of life. The suffering servant will know life again. And we know of Jesus' resurrection. His raising to life would point to the justification of many, and that their sins had been paid for. He will be great and victorious, we read. He will divide the spoils of the victory, and we will share in his victory and the blessings that result from his defeat of sin, the enemy, death, and brokenness. His life was not poured out in vain. No, he bore the sin of many, and we read here that he made intercession for the rebellious, for the transgressors. He stood in between us and God, satisfying God's wrath and making us friends of the living God, sons and daughters of the Most High, no longer to be called enemies. God's plan includes a victorious king, the one who reigns as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The promise and the reality for us to hold on to. Holding on to the obedient servant who sets right the disobedience of the garden in the first Adam by coming as the second Adam. Holding on to the one who unexpectedly blesses the nations as the promise had gone out to Abraham. Jesus comes to fulfill. Holding on to the one who comes in seeming weakness as the despised suffering servant, starting as an obscure infant laid in a manger, but who is the strong God's plan. Holding on to the one who pays for my rebellion and extends redemption to me, full redemption for my rebellion. Holding on to the one who takes my guilt as the suffering servant, suffering the weight of my guilt as it is laid on him by God. He pays because I cannot. Holding on to the one who is raised to life, not as the suffering servant alone, but also as the victorious king. God's plan has been accomplished. Redemption, rescue, wholeness, life, forgiveness, deep connection, all is set right again, as intended. And this King, the resurrected one, truly rules and reigns. Yet what does this message have at all to do with Christmas, anyways? Perhaps I woke up this morning and have my church seasons confused. I mean, this is supposed to be the time where we celebrate the cute little baby being laid in the manger. And we are. A number of years ago, when I was a youth pastor, we decided on a Christmas Eve to have a drama. And we had this song that we had picked, and we acted out the motions to the song. And we started with Mary giving birth to Jesus and laying him in the manger. And we ended that drama by having Jesus on the cross on Christmas Eve. And people did not even wait until the night was finished before they came to me and they started to register their complaints with me. They said, I came to see the innocent, cute little baby laid in the manger, and you destroyed my Christmas Eve by showing a tormented person hung on a cross. How could you ruin my Christmas Eve? They actually said that. We have to remember they go together. The baby in the manger whom we celebrate coming is the suffering servant and the victorious king. God's mission that started in the garden came into a manger in Bethlehem through the Virgin Mary, born as one who was fully human and fully God. Yet he came with the destiny of being the suffering servant that Isaiah had spoken of 700 years before. And today we are people not only of the promise that Isaiah had put out there, but we are people of the reality. This morning, have you responded to the suffering servant? This is not some cute baby lying in the manger who ushers in a season of materialism and overeating. No, this is the suffering servant, the baby on mission, doing God's will to win you and I back to himself. Let's stand together. This morning, may we respond with joy and worship towards the suffering servant and the promised King who is coming. Let's pray together and we'll worship. Jesus, thank you for coming. God, we're so amazed to see you at work. This incredible plan that you put into operation. These amazing promises that you kept through the centuries. We thank you for these words of Isaiah, this promise that he spoke of 700 years before Jesus came in. We thank you for that promise. But today, oh God, we thank you even more for the reality, because we're not just holding on to a promise, but no, today we hold on to the reality of the one who came, the one who was born in a manger, who came to finish the rescue mission of God, the one who came to bring full redemption, the one who came as the suffering servant and now reigns as the victorious King. Jesus, today, I pray that you would help us to turn our focus to you. May these words of Isaiah, may they ring in our ears and in our hearts and in our minds. And may they call us forward to put our trust in the one who came to pay the price we could not pay. The one who took on our sufferings, the one who took on our pain, the one who took on our sin, the one who took on our guilt, the one to bring redemption. Full redemption for those who are in rebellion. Thank you, Jesus. Amen.